Hello. Hola. Welcome. I think we're going to get started. My name's Meghan Wells. I'm the Cultural Arts Division Manager for the City of Austin in the Economic Development Department. I just want to say thank you so much for joining us tonight, taking time out of your busy day and your busy summer. I hope it's going well for you. I will just start off our night by saying that we are looking forward to some great conversation tonight as we talk through what this town hall is intended to address, which is equity, access, and investment in arts and culture. And this conversation is really the first opportunity and the first phase of a process that we're going through at the city to examine the systems we have and the access that we provide to the arts through the Cultural Arts Division and through economic development. So I am appreciative of everyone being here. This is the kickoff event, but there will be many, many opportunities for further conversation. We hope to see you throughout the summer and throughout the year. So I just want to acknowledge the Cultural Arts Division staff that are here to help out with events. Please raise your hand if you're on the CAD staff. Thank you all so much for helping with this. Takes a village. And I also want to recognize the arts commissioners who are here tonight. If you're on the Arts Commission, please stand. Thank you all so much. And really, it's the community that makes this work possible and successful, so thanks to you all again. I want to hand over the program now to Sylnovia Holt-Rabb, who is the Deputy Director for Economic Development, and let her say a few words and give you some background about where we are and where we're going, and then she will pass it on to Alberto Mejia, who is the newest CAD member on my team, and then we'll pass it on to Margie Reese to get us started in conversation. So, Sylnovia, thank you.
Thank you, Meghan, and good evening again. As Meghan said, I am the Deputy Director for Economic Development. I just really wanted to come and kind of set the stage and remind us of the background and why we're here. In the fall of 2018, as a result of the growing need, we came to an intersection where we had a tremendous growth in the arts, still increasing in the hotel occupancy tax, but we recognized that at that intersection, we had been considering it for a couple of years that we needed to go back and kind of examine the guidelines. So we are here tonight building off of the progress of the Arts Commission's working group, the Responsiveness Working Group, and the Equity Working Group. And we are really aiming to tackle this process with the greatest level of inclusion, consistency, and a clear understanding. Fall of last year, we committed to you to be more transparent, to be more communicative. And I want to thank Meghan for sending out the monthly newsletters, trying to keep everyone informed. And I committed to the Arts Commission to provide timely updates in terms of the hotel occupancy tax. And just as a reminder, this is the same PowerPoint that we presented last year that shows the actual revenues coming in compared to our expenses. So again, I want to be crystal clear. Hotel occupancy tax continues to go up. No question about that. But we have had an explosive growth of applications that qualify to be funded. The next slide indicates actual growth in terms of the numbers. And so again, Austin is growing. We have a very robust arts group. And again, we want to dialogue with you on how do we really move forward. What does the process look like for equity and access and how we fund our organizations going forward? So I want to leave you again with 4 crystal clear points because I've heard some things out in the community. I just want to make it crystal clear. Last fall, we came to a crossroads. We committed to being more communicative with you. We are here tonight to start the process. We have actually sent a memo to council in June 17th telling them in advance, because one of the criticisms we received is that we didn't notify you in advance. So in our memo, we clearly told council, yes, hotel occupancy tax is going up, but the amount we have to spend from this year to possibly next year is going to decrease. The staff follows the guidelines, that are approved by the Arts Commission. This program was audited by the City Audits Department, and I invite you to go and look at this report. It's one of the best reports that the Audit Department has done. And staff, they are following the guidelines. And finally, we are here tonight, again, to dialogue with you, to hear from you, so that we can move forward together as a community. And if at any point during this process you have questions, you have concerns, please know my door is always open. Give me a call, let us sit down, let us dialogue, and I am happy to always answer any questions. But again, thank you for coming tonight. I'm looking forward to a robust conversation. And now I'm going to turn it over to Alberto.
Good evening, everybody. I'm so glad to see y'all here. Thank you for showing up and forgive us for the onslaught of emails and notifications, but thank you so much. Once again, my name is Alberto Mejia, and I am the new manager of cultural funding and investments for the Cultural Arts Division. So one thing I want to say as we go on, I want to point out also amidst what Sylnovia just mentioned about the hot taxes and also the overall demand growth in terms of our cultural funding, that I want to give our staff some shout outs, because this graph here shows the increase of workshops out in the community that our staff has done since 2014. I just want to point that out to y'all. And I'd like to also point out the growth in Alana or POC-centered cultural contractors. So I just want to put that out there too, that by no means are we ever done on this work, but there is work being done. Okay? Great. So this is where we land, y'all. This is what we're here to do, embark on this process together. And soon I'm going to introduce Margie Reese and her colleague Ashley, but I want to give y'all an overview of how this process is going to carry out. We're just at the beginning. We're here in phase 1, and our goal here is to hold our listening sessions, hear your views of individuals. Even prior to today, we've engaged our own internal departments. That includes other staff from Economic Development, Public Works, Parks and Recreation, Austin Public Health, Neighborhood Housing, and Community Development. Also, I want to be very clear that we aim to have very close partnership through this process with the Office of Equity, and I believe they're in the house tonight, so I want to make that really clear that they are our partners throughout this process. We also have had a small group of stakeholders that come from social services, education, community advocacy, community organizing in particular, faith-based groups and funders, and we're just getting started, y'all, here in phase 1. Phase 2 is when we conclude listening sessions, start feedback with y'all, continue the analysis, and organize these conversations for more specific themes and direction. Phase 3 is when we facilitate conversations with community around these themes and directions to refine and reshape the cultural funding program to begin forming draft recommendations for program changes. Moving to phase 4, which takes us into December and January of 2019. Those draft recommendations are lined up for program changes, discussion with staff and our Arts Commission working groups. And finally, phase 5, February, March 2020, the community feedback and dialogue around the draft recommendations for program changes will be briefed with council members and aimed for adoption with the Arts Commission. So I'm sorry if that was long-winded, y'all, but we want to be crystal clear that we're just at the beginning, and we want full partnership with all our creatives and our other citizens who could consider themselves peripheral to cultural arts. We really want to make this process as inclusive of all Austin as possible. So finally, y'all, and I'll bring this up again at the end of the evening before I hand it off to Margie. This is going to be our official landing spot for the work as it progresses. Please take notes, take it down. If you signed up on our list out there, you're going to get this information anyway, but just so you know, there is a home base for all this work. Some of y'all that signed in, hopefully you click the box to subscribe to our newsletter, another great way to stay in touch. We have our social media channels, which we'll be posting things on. It's simply at City of Austin Arts. And of course, we hope that you'll come visit us in our new location off of Ben White down there in the south side, which I'm really excited about because I live in Dove Springs. And our office hours are on 2nd and 4th Tuesdays, 9 a.m. to 1 p.m., and there's no appointment necessary. So we really hope to see y'all there. Excuse me, the address is 5202 East Ben White. All right. And Suite 400 We're just past Lone Star Meats. All right, y'all, let me introduce Margie. Margie is a native of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. She brings exceptional skills in cultural planning and implementation design. Margie's career has included arts leadership in Dallas and Los Angeles. She's been an advisor to the nation's most diverse communities. She has worked directly with artists and other creative professionals to enhance their employment and business opportunities in both the nonprofit and commercial sectors. So we are thrilled to have Margie here today, and I'd like to invite her to go ahead and get started, and she's going to introduce Ashley. Thank you all so much for being here.
Austin, how are you? Come on, Austin, now y'all gonna have to deal with me better than that. Okay, listen up. This is not your regular town hall, corporately facilitated conversation, because we are people that represent, support, and patronize the creative sector. What we have to talk about here tonight is absolutely one of the messiest conversations that we have to have as part of city government. I want you to know that I am a registered, as you heard Alberto say, card-carrying bureaucrat. So I deal with policies and procedures and elected officials, communities, both the for-profit sector and the nonprofit sector, et cetera. And I have working with me on this project a team of young arts administrators that represent both the performing arts, the visual arts, arts education sectors as well. And they're interchangeable. None of them are my favorite, they're all my favorite. But with me this evening is Ashley Renee Watkins. Ashley has been working with me for about 10 years. She is a professional opera singer. Yeah, she looks really like the traditional, right? And she's a teaching artist at Lincoln Center. So she's down here from New York this morning, working with us on this project, just to launch this conversation. It seems to me that the city is interested in a couple of things. It's interested in understanding how it can move forward and respond to both the funding opportunities that they currently provide, what the guidelines say, what kinds of programs and projects they support, how to protect the major cultural institutions, how to open up their arms more broadly to make sure that they're including innovative artists, new artists, artists that identify differently, racially, socially, economically, and also to think about its identity as a community called Austin. It's a tall order, and I'm really excited to be with you this evening and to see so many people in this first conversation. But here's what I think is most important. Should I leave? That's a fly. I've been called worse. Here's what I think is most important. I think it's really important that we talk to each other and share language so that I can have a baseline of understanding about how you use your words, how you use terminology. I could give you the Margie Reese bureaucratic definition of anything you want me to give you a definition about. Culture, identity, expression, but that wouldn't be helpful for me because it wouldn't represent your understanding and the community that you represent, that understanding of what cultural identity is. So we're gonna ask Ashley to jump in here and lead you through an exercise. I want you, if you're holding things, I know you wanna take notes and all that, but if you've got, things you can put down on the floor, we're gonna move around a little bit. And so let's relax, make yourself comfortable. We're here so that I can hear from you. You don't need to just hear from me tonight, right? You'll get a chance to do that later and later. So Ashley, we're gonna let you kick us off.
Hello, everyone. I'm so excited. This is my first time in Austin. I've heard so much about the city, so I'm really excited. But I am a Southerner. I'm from New Orleans originally. All right, Louisiana. Yeah. Okay. So, like, I call her Miss Margie, but I'll call her. Can I call you Margie tonight? No, Miss Margie. So, like Miss I tried. Like Miss Margie said, we're going to do a little bit of moving around, and that's actually going to happen now. Now, with your moving, you're going to have to do a little bit of choice making. I do acknowledge that it is a large number of you in the room, and this activity is done with, all groups of all sizes. So the challenge for you will be to sort of make space for each other's voices as we do this. So choice making. This is an activity I call 4 corners because you're going to either be moving to 3 corners or 4 corners, and we're just going to do 2 quick rounds of it. So the first choice that you'll have, I'm going to give you a quote, and you'll make a choice about whether you agree with that quote, disagree with that quote, or find yourself stuck in the middle. If you disagree with it, you'll find yourself over here in this area. If you agree with it, you'll find yourself over here in this area. And if you're sort of stuck in the middle, you'll congregate somewhere around here. And when you get to your groups, you'll discuss why you agree, disagree, or stuck in the middle about it, and it's a lot of you, so you might find yourself in smaller groups, but we will have sort of a share out from the groups. Does that make sense? Great, all right. So the quote is, the more you say, the less people remember. Again, the quote is, the more you say, the less people remember. If you agree with that quote, find yourself over here, disagree over here, stuck in the middle, and I'm going to give you a time. You'll have once you get settled, about 4 minutes to discuss. That's not enough time, but that is just fine. All right, so let's bring it to a pause. Let's hear just a highlight from one group that agrees with the quote, which is the more you say, the less people remember. Who is in agreement with that quote? Over here? Let's hear a highlight. Yeah, go for it.
So I believe you can get your point across more by nonverbal communication, and less is better.
Less is better. Any other ones for agree? Go for it. Too much information is too much information. What about someone that disagrees with that?
We were a small group. We still did not have enough time to discuss, but we were thinking that more, it's how you define more. So sometimes more can be as if quality, the deeper you can get with that discussion, the harder it is sometimes for that group to hear, because it's actually going a little deeper and a little bit more dense for people. And sometimes it's a little bit more meaningful and grounded. That's a little bit about that.
Yeah, that. All right, for those of you like, yeah, there's another perspective in the room. What about someone that was sort of indifferent or stuck in the middle with it? Could see it from both ways. Here? Let's get a... I think so. Hold on, 1 second.
Right. Right. So who's talking was one point, and also how the message is delivered is another point.
We also talked about impact, whether more is really about like a fact that you remember, or if it's an emotional impact, or you might remember more like you remember a novel in great detail because it had a significant emotional impact on you. But that's not to say something else couldn't have a different level of that impact.
Well, the question is somewhat ambiguous, because is it more as a percentage of the total that you are talking about, or is it the absolute amount that you remember? Because it's a big difference.
So what I love about this activity is it does help us to see who's in the room, too. So for those of you who didn't jump in this round, I hope you jump into the next one. All right, yes.
And we also understand that there may be some folks who aren't as able to move around so easily as others. So we also want you to just raise your hand, and we'll make sure that we want to include what you're thinking and saying as well, and we'll have a microphone come to you. Will that work?
Absolutely. All right, so you thought that one was ambiguous. All right. So the next one, this is always when I say humor me, because just humor me. You'll hear it in a second. All right. So this is 4 choices that you have. So if you are a construction worker, what is your most important safety tool? So I'm going to give you 4 tools to choose from. This is choice, so just choose one, even if you would say more than one. Just choose one for tonight. So if you're a construction worker, do you think that a hard hat is the most important? Hard hat is on my left. Do you think that safety goggles or eyewear protection is the most important? So we have hard hat on my left, safety goggles on the right. In the back, steel-toed boots. In the back on my right, steel-toed boots. And then in this back area, we have gloves, safety gloves. So we have hat on my left. On my right, we have safety goggles. In the back, we have steel-toed boots on the back right. And then gloves.
Let's wrap it up. We want to hear from each of the 4 corners in the room. We want to hear what you're saying to each other. And we also want to hear from the folks in the middle who aren't moving around as much, but we do want to hear what you say. Can we ask them for their thoughts before we begin? Anybody in the middle want to share out?
It wasn't a complete question. In what form of construction?
I really don't want to.
Whatever you decide.
Then I don't need any of those. Because I'm a tile set.
Anybody else in the middle? Okay, first of all, it wasn't a clear question, so she doesn't have to make any choices. That's a very good response. Let's hear from the hard hat group.
I could do without a foot, I could do without a hand, I could do without an eye, but I can't do without my brain, so hard hat.
You can't do without your brains. Would you mind sharing your response?
Well, I do construction and installation, and we have to wear hard hats, eyeglasses, steel-toe boots, everything. And for me, we do soldering on connections. We're around people that are welding. We're around people that, they're cutting wood and everything. There's things that could fly all over the room. So for me, I'd rather protect my eyes than the mushy stuff between my ears.
Yeah, you want to speak to it? Tony, go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree that the most important tool is your brain, but the eyes and the ears and the other senses can help you avoid the danger in the first place.
Avoid the danger in the first place. Let's hear from this group back here. Anybody?
We're the boots section. We had a lot of different discussions, but it kind of boiled down to the boots are the foundation element. Everything else came after that. Boots are necessary to walk around the site, necessary to protect you in doing what you need to do, and that's just, I think, does anybody else have anything to add to that?
I think we could just add that the shoes are made to fit you personally. They'll keep you comfortable throughout the day. And then I also said that we kind of already have a hard hat built in the cranium, and you already have eyelids that you can blink, so without shoes, you're very naked there.
All right. You have to have a foundation.
I think quickly too, it's what you rely on when you're not looking, and it's that foundation level. And then it's also the most common injury that I've had when I'm working on something, is dropping things on my feet.
All right, let's hear from this group back here.
The Glove Alliance.
I love it.
These are all valid points, but 95% of the construction I've ever done, I'm wearing gloves and not any of that stuff. So.
Any others? The gloves are complete.
Thank you, Glove Alliance. All right, so you can stay where you are. Let's go ahead and take a look at this list. Yeah. So what we're sort of doing is thinking around these sort of concepts about open dialogue. I love the idea that the quote was found to be ambiguous. It is ambiguous, and it is about a sense of creating a space for open dialogue. So yes, there is ambiguity in the quote. Sometimes there is a call for depth in what you're saying, and sometimes there's a call for being concise. But it's all about creating a space for open dialogue so that all of those sort of instances can take place. The other idea is a sense of preparedness. I loved, what's your name? Richard. I love that. Really struck me because it's sort of going in with what you need, depending on what it calls for. So we do want to think about, in this idea of our community that we're building today, having a sense of preparedness, how we want to prepare to participate in this conversation today. What tool do you need right now in order to dig into this dialogue today? So I'd love for us to build this out a little bit more. So what we're doing is thinking around community agreements. So we are a community within communities tonight. So in your groups-ish, because they're huge, yeah, so we have some over here. What we want to do is come up with just a few more bullet points to add to this list. So turn to sort of like globs. Gloves is pretty concise, so you guys are pretty small, so you all can come up with, I have a feeling about you guys. So gloves, you'll be pretty good to work in a group and sort of come up in agreement with one more bullet point that you think we can add to what's going to help us to function well as a community tonight. Does that make sense to you all? All right, this group, yeah, we're going to split it. So this group, let's say right here, backpack, shoulder. I love those backpacks, by the way. We're going to have you be sort of the split point. So everyone from here on back split into one sort of big group, and then everyone here. And if you think it's still too big, go to the other group. Come up with another 1 or 2 bullet points to add to this community agreement, and then this group and this group are fine. So one thing that you think we should add, 1 or 2 things that should add to this list of our community agreements for the night. Cool? All right, so I'm going to give you all a whopping 4 minutes to discuss, bullet point, and we'll add it. In 3, 2, and 1. And we'll make sure that you have a mic. Let's see someone from this group ready to give us one? 1 or 2, yeah. You got it?
We have 4. Respect.
Yes.
Diversity.
Respect, diversity.
Support.
Support.
Transparency.
Transparency.
we were thinking about or talking about safety in the sense that when there are a lot of people in the room whose organizations depend on funding, you get very scared that you're going to say something that somehow is going to affect your funding, whether that's through competition or just being seen as a pariah or whatever. Well, what we said was safety, but it's because of the money.
So the other one was honesty to add over here. Yeah, we have safety. All right, let's come back here. Yep, go for it.
Giving a voice to everybody. So it was mentioned that sometimes the same people are always are talking, and so it's that everybody gets a voice and everybody gets heard. And how did you say it?
I said make space, not take space.
Make space, not take space. Somebody works with community agreements back there. Okay, let's hear from the Glove.
The Glove Alliance has
Glove
one for
Alliance.
each finger. Ready? Respect, empathy.
Hold on 1 second, let's reset up here. So we have respect, I'll star it. Empathy.
Experience.
Experience.
Awareness. And lastly, the pinky is facts.
Facts.
So respect was our first one as well,
Yeah.
just like that group.
Yeah, we asterisked respect because it actually came up. So that's, all right, any more? So I'll just read them back. We have open dialogue, preparedness, respect, diversity, transparency, support, safety, safe space, especially when talking about things like funds and money, honesty, giving voice to everyone, make space, not take space, empathy, experience, awareness, and facts. Yep.
We came up with respect, honesty, transparency, patience, and participation. And snacks, somebody said.
And snacks. Yes, making sure everyone is fed, yes. Participation. Okay, thank you all so much. So we're gonna pop these up. So these are checkpoints for us. It's checkpoints for us as all a community and as an individual. So if you're someone that doesn't usually step up and speak, challenge yourself tonight. And if you're someone that does speak a lot, also make space, not take space. All right, so we're gonna keep you where you are. Please do not return to the middle. You're gonna be doing a lot of talking with each other tonight. Yep.
Now you can find a seat in your section so you don't have to stand up, but we do want you to continue to talk as groups. Yeah. So now we're going to move a little bit deeper into this conversation and ask you to think about language. You can keep talking. There's water and some snacks. We got the snack word down. We want to think about language with you. So you heard in the opening conversation a little bit about the focus for this assessment has to do with the distribution of dollars, just to be real crass about it, of funding that supports arts and culture in Austin, and that the city is looking at this work through the equity lens, thinking about all sorts of equity, that we want you to help us understand how you use some of these words. And so a couple of them that we want to think about are listed here, and there are dozens of others, but let's just dive in. What we're hearing that the city is looking at is thinking about equity. They're thinking about race in that process. They're thinking about culture in how the dollars are distributed. They're thinking about gentrification, the disappearance of neighborhoods and regions of the city. They're thinking also about equality. We could have said equal, we could have used some other words, but we're gonna nail this for now. We're also thinking about access, and what does that mean to you and to the communities that you represent or the organizations that you work with. And then this is another interesting term that we found as we took a look at the current material that the City of Austin uses to describe their support. This word is quality. So we want to understand how you use that word and how is it defined, self-defined, and then what are the restrictions and opportunities when we use words like this. Diversity, of course, what does that mean to you? I said earlier, some people use this word as though it's a noun. Some people use it as a verb. Some people just throw it out there to answer a question. Inclusion. I can be invited and I can be allowed to participate, but am I included once I arrive? Process. This is one I love, which is where we're starting tonight. The process of talking with Austin is a long-term process about how we achieve some adjustments to the distribution of the arts funding dollars. Identity is another one. How I identify, who I identify with, what are those descriptive words that I use when I identify myself. And then policy, the rule book, the game plan. How do we measure our work? So the staff are going to pass around some notebooks. And we just need you to turn around and talk to each other. We're not going to divide these into groups. And I think that it might be better, as in your groups, if you think about 2 or 3 of these words to talk about in your group, to tell us how your group defines any of these that you choose to discuss. So hopefully we'll have, 7 or 8 different groups. But we just want you to turn to your neighbors where you are, and let's just talk about, we could be missing a dozen other words from this list as it relates to this whole conversation about access, equity, and inclusion. But let's start with this list. Let's choose 2 or 3 words from this list as a group that you will agree just to talk about in your group so that we can get a better sense of your definitions. Now, here's the final thing. We need one person from your group who will agree to come to the front, to this microphone over here at the end of our time and just share out for a couple of minutes what your group has discussed, what words you've been talking about, and how you've defined those words as a group. Are you with me? Okay, the clock starts ticking now. You can start looking at these words right away and decide which 2 or 3 are resonating with you that you're going to talk back to us about. Okay, everyone. I love it when the conversation just gets started and the facilitator interrupts you. So let's wrap up now because we need to share out, we need to hear what you're talking about. So let's wrap up. We're going to ask the one person from each of the groups to just start coming up front now, if you don't mind. Who's going to be talking about your group conversation? Can we have those thought leaders coming up front now? Whoa, here's a first thought leader. Who else is going to be talking about? Excellent. I got 1, 2, 3. Do I have 4? Do I have another person that's going to share out from your group conversation? Okay, let's give them a round of applause. Do I have everybody up here? Okay, the mic is yours. All right, let's listen up, everyone, because this is the richness of the conversation. We want to make sure that we hear it. This is Austin talking back to us.
I'm Austin. All right, in our group, we talked about diversity for the most part. That was where most of our conversation was. And it started with the idea that people often use diversity and inclusion as the same thing, but they're not the same thing. For some people, when they want to use the word diversity in terms of an event they're putting on, they just kind of consider it showing up. So they might invite a group to be a part of the audience to show that they're diverse, but their actual programming isn't that diverse. We also talked about how diversity also includes age, sex, gender, discipline, and experience in terms of art, the mediums. And then how not all words are inclusive of all groups. So if you say Hispanic, how there's so many different cultures within Hispanic, so that's not like all-encompassing. And then we also said assumptions are made about who has access to certain events. So again, in terms of someone throwing an event and inviting a group, assuming that they don't have access to it or that they want access to it and kind of like giving it to them. We talked about quality for a little bit. We kind of decided it's not a super helpful term for funding because it's very complex. It is attached to impact and whether it evokes something for an individual. So it's hard to say that quality is the same for all people because it's not. We also were questioning who can judge quality because it's so individualistic. But that's all. Thanks.
Process needs to be predictable.
We're kind of together. I took the notes and Rosie was our leader, so. Yeah. We talked about equity. I'm sorry. We talked about equity and the awareness of the historical context that we're working under, awareness of power and resources, an active commitment to share resources. You have to be able to determine the needs in the community and then institutionally remove the fence that's in the community.
So basically for that one, what we had was, if you can think of the picture where there's the fence or the wall and there's like 4 people looking over, and when you look to the back, from the back of them, you see some people have a stool, some people are tall enough to see over, and so on and so on. So what we're saying is we want to remove those barriers to make sure that everyone can look over the fence, but then also we also are thinking about, let's just remove the fence.
We talked about defining the needs and the wants in a group and balancing the imbalances, and that race would not predict the disparities in the system, and equity is not passive, it must be a proactiveness, and you have to be aware.
So the other part, something I wanted to add to that is that with the historically, what we were saying is that historically in Austin, you could see that some people were getting more funding than others, some groups were getting more funding than others, and we want to remove that and make sure that everybody's able to get the funding.
We talked about inclusion. We talked about inclusion and access, that inclusion is not exclusion, that you have to keep pushing out and what were we talking about? Marginalizing people. That if you're unaware and not noticing, that can cause inclusion problems. There's recognition of voices, cultures, experiences, and differences, and people with disabilities always need to be included in the process. And then
also making sure that we're including people with different languages that use different languages.
And the last thing we talked about was access, that making applications simple so that everyone has all the information they need and the assistance to fill out the applications.
So in our group, we talked about culture. Culture is very big in our group. We're all Native Americans in this group right here, and we want to share our culture with everyone in the community. And so it kind of rolled into inclusion because we don't want to exclude anyone, regardless of your background, your gender, your religious beliefs, or anything. Everyone's always welcome. And those things include sharing of our culture of artwork, dance, fashion. And that brings us to our next point is access, because there's a lot of people that may not know about our organization or your organization, and we need to get the word out to different outlets and work together as a whole to get everyone out there. Whether that be through great communication, through networking, whatever there is, to try to get that word out there that we are here, and there are different organizations that all need help and support, not just us. So, that's it.
Well, my group really just talked about the new trailer for the Judy movie that's coming out. It is pretty awesome. If you haven't seen it, check it out. But seriously, folks, we actually spent a lot of time talking about equity. And just like the second group that came up talked about, we did do the fence metaphor because we love it. But we talked about the difficulties around equity and how it pertains to the work that we're doing here, specifically around the resources that are given to arts organizations and how if this big pile of money, the idea would be, from an equity standpoint, to try to raise our arts organizations up into similar levels so that you're not giving the hugest pieces of pie to the hugest organizations and the smallest pieces of pie to the smallest organizations. That, of course, led to some discussion and problems around the legacy organizations that are around. They're big and that are typically getting those monies and how we deal with that. So it's a very complex issue that we in our group solved, right? So it's pretty much over. So thank you. Our group is number one. Throwing down the gauntlet here. We also spent a little bit of time talking about inclusion and how difficult inclusion is, because as an organization, you can't just open your doors and say, come on in, because people won't come in. You have to actively work to include and make sure that it's a welcoming place. So if you've got an organization that's filled with a whole bunch of old white guys, there's not going to be a woman of color or a person with disabilities that's going to naturally come there. So it's an ongoing process, and it's, as we said, it's more than an invitation, and that's work. It's work we all really should be doing if we're not doing it. I know my organization is, because we're perfect. And we said we can't serve everyone all the time, and it's an ongoing process, and none of us, with the exception of Ground Floor Theater, is perfect. Thank you.
So I was asked to represent this group over here. A lot of the things that previous speakers have spoken about, we kind of agreed with as well, but we hit upon, and we were equitable in how long we spent talking about each point. By the way, I will say that was good. We talked about access, gentrification, and equity. Access to everything, meaning not just access to physical space, but also access to information and access to education and access to money and access to the people who make the policies. So, and then also, oh, this isn't my handwriting. I thought I could read it. I got it. Okay. And then for gentrification, we talked about what gentrification meant to us, which was the lack of respect for a culture or a group or of people or a neighborhood or a religion, but it has a lack of. And then gentrification is also, one of the things that we talked about was that for us, the word gentrification also includes the Austin surrounding area. So for instance, they made a good point where, a lot of the funding only pertains to programs that are being asked to do inside the city limits, but as our folks and the people we serve expands outside into Pflugerville and Round Rock and Buda. The idea was that we should be able to talk about how we can still serve the regional aspects. So, sorry, I may have slaughtered that. Okay. Okay, good. And then for equity, we had a really awesome perspective. The perspective of equity as an investment. So equity, so looking at how equity, or looking at each group as an investment, and the investment being, the equity being not just the space that they're in, but also the amount of years and experience and history in that organization. And how do we find equity with funding with regards to that? So that's what we.
So our group in the back, we really put trust at the center of all of these terms, but especially when it comes to equity and identity in Austin. The fact that there's such a gap of trust between so many communities in Austin, and especially within the arts community as well, due to competition of resources and inequitable distribution, as everyone has discussed, and competition for different mediums of art and for funding, and really that, Austin's going through so many periods of transformation and just really needs to achieve a better balance of preservation and development within its identity.
So Glove Alliance number 2 chose diversity. And we looked at it more holistically as a word that really needs a definition. Because if you say diversity to any one person, and we did this within our group, one person thought of race, one person thought of need. So everybody can think of that word a little bit differently. And we feel like it's become kind of a buzzword that everybody's like, well, we're a very diverse organization. But what does that really mean if you don't define what diversity means to you? So our thought is that some of these words up here are ambiguous, kind of like the questions that you proposed to us before. And so they really need to be defined in a way that if you are applying for a grant or trying to understand what the city really means, is that we know what the definition is from the city.
How's everybody doing? That's what I'm talking about. All right, we had picked diversity, policy, and inclusion, but we fell on policy and inclusion. And my group, who volunteered me to come up, by consensus, the disclaimer, the views expressed here, and never mind, you know that speech. All right, so we talked about policy. Everyone should be able to work on or participate in policy. This is real inclusion, because even though you're included at the table, are you really heard at the table? So there you go. Lisa, one of my board members. Accountability came up, and this was done by a friend, not me, but by a friend. Policy of hot tax isn't enforced because most of the creative groups don't adhere to the tourism mandate. Ooh, I got one. Okay. And then the last thing is, as it almost still relates to tourism, I think as the smaller groups in here, a lot of small groups, not the larger groups, that we have become destination points, but some of the smaller groups, I think what we are trying to do, and I say the royal we are trying to create community impact, get the community involved, and to come out and expose our youth, not in that way, but expose our youth to all of the arts, so that as we move down the road, those coming up behind us will engage and become our future theater leaders, patrons, whatever you want to call it. One more thing. Spectrum Theater Company Pipeline opens this Friday at the DAC Theater. Come on out, by Dominique Morceau.
So Also, I do realize, first and foremost, just my ego has the need to do this, that this is the third time I've spoken into the mic. I was also voluntold up here, and I'm trying not to break my own rule about taking space. But we started with the word inclusion, and I'm going to invite my group to speak up if you feel like anything is off. We started with inclusion, went to access, and then pretty much ended up on every word on this sheet. And I think to really quickly summarize, we agree with a lot of the other groups in that equity is not the same as equality, and diversity is not the same as inclusion. Diversity might be an invitation, but inclusion is dancing at the party, right? You need to have the feeling and this in the space of that inclusion. And we started on a theme, and I'm not going to say this is sort of a fact, but we started on the theme that equity might be a bit of an umbrella term for many of the other terms because it's more broad, and the other terms serve their specific purpose within the conversation to pivot and to hone in on certain areas. But what we really got to was how these words relate to the cultural arts funding, and it really comes down to, and the theme with equity is that it's about the resources, which has been said in many different ways, and I liked Mary in our group. She had the lemon story in which it was cut in half for two children, and they each got half. It seemed equal, but one needed the zest and one needed the juice. So it's, and all of that is to say that basically the process and the policy needs to reflect those nuances of what people's needs are, and they're not all the same, and to counteract the negative impacts of previous processes or policies that have plagued us.
Thank you, everybody, for participating in a very ambiguous process. Because what you learn when you think about conversations, we could give you, or the city could, we could put some definitions up here and say, build your programs and your budgets and your staffs around this definition. And as you just heard, there would be exclusion somewhere along the line, because my definition of inclusion is going to be different from yours. So we are going to spend the next year gathering more information from your neighbors and colleagues to try to come up with a framework for some of these definitions. But we are not going to be able to have a definition that doesn't allow us to excuse ourselves. You see, once I define something, you're able to target that, and if you step outside of that, you can say, well, I did what they said I should do. I have one other set of notes, if the author doesn't mind. He says that group thinking gets you nowhere. You need leaders, and that he's willing to be a leader. So I appreciate that, and that was a comment from one of your colleagues. I want to thank you for having this conversation with us, because you need to hear from each other that the arc of this discussion about equity and inclusion is a really steep arc in this city. And this opportunity for you to hear from each other is just the tip of the iceberg about what people are thinking around these kinds of terms. And it won't matter what policies and practices the city ultimately defines unless you continue to talk to each other and clarify for yourselves what you think about these terms. The fact that you're here tonight is, I applaud you for being a part of the process. I want to shift a little bit and just have you not speak but think for a minute then about how this discussion that you've just had shapes your program planning. I'm going to try to go with these 5 without stuttering. How this conversation about diversity and inclusion shapes your program planning, and therefore your requests for funding to the city for dollars that are generated by hotel occupancy taxes. How does this conversation shape the way you market those programs, and to whom? How does this conversation about diversity shape the way you determine meaningful leadership for your organization? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. What are those qualities of quality that helps you decide who is the leader and the spokesperson for your organization? How does this conversation also help you participate in the political process that establishes policy? So if you're not at the table, in the game, astute, aware, using your voice, policies and practices are going to be created without you. And then they will be implemented, and you will be adjudicated based on those policies and practices. And then the last one is integrity. How does your work as an arts organization, a cultural institution, an institution based in heritage and preservation, where does the word integrity, how does that play at your board table and your staff meetings when you think about authentically, and you're asking the city, which is appropriate, to be transparent, to provide an equitable playing field? How do those characteristics and those attributes fit at your table within your own organizations? So a little bit of self-reflection also. All toward this idea that this is a pivot moment, this idea of cultural sustainability. Now this is the 5 seconds worth of just thinking about this term, this very ambiguous term, right? I used to teach a class called Cultural Sustainability, and at the beginning and the end of every course, the students would say, I don't know. Sustainability, as we use it in the nonprofit sector, tries to apply to continuation. If I give you funding for something, will you be able to continue it, to sustain the momentum that my funding has provided? So that's a clear, understood definition of sustainability. But I want you to shift away from that for a second and think about the cultural sustainability of Austin's residents, the sustainability of voices, of experiences, the continuation of those voices, so that as your city continues to grow and change, there are some things that you may want to continue, and that is from a cultural perspective, the richness of Austin and its people. How do we think about these words and the 5 points, the marketing, right, integrity, around this idea of sustaining our cultural identities, our social identities, our geographic identities? As a bureaucrat, when I think about, and I've asked you to be quiet, I should too, right? But when I think about cultural sustainability, I've got to think about it from that let's tear down the fence mentality, because it's not my job, as it is not Meghan's job, to serve anybody. It's our jobs to serve everybody. How do we do that in such a way that uplifts and sustains the cultural identity of our communities, of our neighborhoods, and our neighbors? That's the biggest picture conversation. That, to me, is a closer view around diversity than me giving you a codified definition that will be shattered when the next person reads it. So think about cultural sustainability for a second. Get out of your institutional mindset. Put on your civic hat. You know I'm going to ask you to share, right? I'm going to ask Ashley to share with us a little bit about cultural sustainability in a world where she has to defend her identity before she even gets in the door. And so as you think about younger artists, people of color, people with different social identities, having to defend themselves before they even get into your institution's doors or out of them. You think about cultural sustainability. I do have your notes, sorry.
So I wrote down just a few questions when I'm thinking about cultural sustainability from my own personal perspective. As being an artist of color, and specifically thinking about opera and the classical world, where there's a lot of us, but there's not a lot of us at the same time. So 3 questions that I came up with are, what are the benchmarks for fitting into this space that exists already? For me, what are the benchmarks that I should consider for fitting into this space? How much must I assimilate to meet those benchmarks? And then how much of myself must I compromise in this process? So what are the benchmarks? How much do I have to sort of assimilate to this existing space already? And then in that assimilation, how much of myself am I compromising? And I thought of those 3 questions because in this world, there's a lot of controversy about sound. You have to sound a certain way. And if you don't sound this way, then you're not accepted into the world. I have a friend who is an amazing singer, an amazing classical singer, but was told that he would never make it in the industry because he had the black sound. And you have to be able to get rid of the black sound in order to assimilate into the industry, to be accepted into the international industry. And that is an existence which happens quite a bit for singers of any color that is of not the dominant or the thought to be dominant culture within. So those are the kinds of things that I sort of think about in my existence, and it has shifted my relationship with the industry and how I interact with it, and the institutions within the industry. Yeah? Oh, yeah. So the black sound, this is my sound. I don't know if it's a black sound or not, but it's my sound. Going right up in the tree, soon in the morning, right up in the tree, soon in the morning, right up in the tree, soon in the morning, and I hope I'll join the band. That was way too high.
That was her, but that is, yeah, that's exactly. From a cultural perspective, this is her music that she grew up valuing, is the point. She would. That's what the critics are saying to black opera singers.
The vowels might change, but my sound is my sound.
Right.
So the whole controversy with my friend was he wasn't allowed to have his sound. His sound, what his voice actually sounds like, was told it doesn't fit into Italian sound. It doesn't fit into French. Oh, but you can sing what I did, which was a spiritual. You can sing those, and you can sing Angus B. Hayden and Courtney Best, but you don't fit into any other. Do you see what I'm saying?
Was it allowed, or was it that he wasn't offered a lot of money?
No. So let's stay up here with it, right?
Yeah.
This is one example of how cultural identities get dismissed or squashed to fit into some standard. This is just one example. I grew up in Louisiana, did not have a voice, wanted to be a dancer, and was told that I would never be able to be a ballet dancer because of my body type, so that I could not bring myself to that art form because I didn't fit in the box. So the conversation that I want to leave us with here about cultural sustainability is, how do we have a conversation, an open conversation, about the range of identities that exist in cultural expression and allow space for people to bring their authentic selves. So that if I'm filling out a grant application and I'm Kiowa, yes? And I'm asked a question that does not resonate with me from a cultural perspective, whoever is reviewing that application is bringing themselves to that process. Are you hanging with me for a second here? And so part of what we want to discuss over the next year is, how do we open up those processes to guarantee that artists, communities, innovative artists, artists working in different mediums, for example, but whatever you're bringing to the table, what do you have to give up in order to be able to access resources? What do you have to give up? What is the compromise that is being made year after year after year after year by artists of color and organizations that don't represent whatever the tradition might be? That someone is having to give up something. And that's the conversation we're just trying to have. Not a debate about, but just an openness about, what are people having to give up in order to conform and to compete? Anybody have a thought about that question? Yes.
Well, my company, the Museum of Fine Arts Austin.
Sorry.
My company, the Museum of Fine Arts Austin, it's a private organization, and we'd have to get an umbrella to be sponsored by the city of Austin, but we're working on a Van Gogh exhibit, bringing Van Goghs here, and we've been doing shows for 28 years all over town. In fact, the video director that's filming this, we showed him at the Driscoll 24 years ago, Robert Heath. So we've represented about 2,000 or 3,000 artists, and we've never asked for any city money. The private sector has always donated everything we need. Kendra Scott, Ron Wood of the Rolling Stones. But it would be nice for the city to provide a space for us a permanent space for our exhibits, although we have had many traveling exhibits, and we have a website too. So I just wanted to say something about that, because we haven't applied for city funding since 1991, but we're still having shows.
Excellent. Thank you. Anyone else?
Two.
I think it's a little bit, it's a little more easy, it's a little easier to understand when, what you were talking about, when you think of a transgender person or a person who is homosexual. When you're thinking about when they want to enter into some kind of an organization or a group or some kind of a cultural thing where they have to be hiding or not be completely honest about their sexual orientation. So that's a little bit more easier, I think, for people to understand when you're thinking about them having to compromise to be able to engage and to participate, as opposed to when you're thinking of someone of a different race. That's a little bit harder to understand, that we, people of color, sometimes are having to assimilate, to ignore our real culture, to ignore our language, not to speak our language, and those types of things.
Thank you for that. One other comment? Yes, sir.
And it kind of falls, my comment falls kind of what? What she just said, because like myself, art culture, even though we're mixed we always hear that in order for us to make it, we have to cross over into the mainstream. And so that's what we always hear that. And I'll use an example, which many that I heard, our singer that unfortunately, is no longer with us, Selena. Every time when she first, she was very popular here, within our culture. But yet, she was not really accepted until she came out with her crossover album into mainstream, which she had to actually sing in English. And yet now that she's gone, most of her music that she sang in her native language, in Spanish, her music, which is called Tejano.
Right.
Music, she is making it big now with big artists that are coming out in big events and singing her music. But yet, in order for her to even make it, in this world, this kind of what she's come up with, this is called a crossover event. We're a crossover.
Thank you.
Mrs. Bureaucrat, one thing that I would love to see someday, and I don't have children, so I cannot say that my children will see it, is when those little labels will disappear from your bureaucrat forms. Here in Austin, I don't need to tell you because you are one of us. We are a town of immigrants. There's fewer Austinites born and bred, and they're living. And we are taking over, all of us that have come from all over the place. And some of us will maybe don't want to compromise our dignity by having to try to prove whether we are Hispanic or gay or Native American. It's very easy, like, okay, your skin color may mark you as an African American, good. What about the rest of us? We have to play the game of what we are or what we are not. Let's hope that we are inclusive, really. And I see that you have the right intention in that sense. Let's see that the bureaucrats follow.
Well said. Thank you. Can you hand the microphone to the lady just in front of you? Sorry.
Thank you. I moved to Austin 30 years ago from Canada, and I was in the grant system over there. And Canada has a federal multicultural policy, and even within that system, they realized that some of the boxes on the forms don't fit, as was said before. And to give a specific example was that they had certain grants where you would go and study in an institution that was approved by them. But for my dance tradition from India, there's no institution that I go and study. I go and study with a master. And so that wasn't even eligible on the form. There were many indigenous forms of art that were also studied under masters and so on, and so they didn't fit. And so they also altered the system to fit all these different cultural traditions. So that's something I just wanted to mention.
Very good, thank you. This gentleman over here, will you pass the mic to him?
This is Samuel EMT. Appreciate the opportunity to speak here today. On that board, what I see and the major thing that I want to talk about is access. Access. See, the access in that part is really have to do with information. Because when you look here now, there will be more people like me here if they were informed that they have that meeting. So culturally, when the cultural are about like the resources, most of the time, they don't know that the resources exist. So you say that we have a table, you're not on the table, there's nothing on that, we correct the issue. First of all, they need access, which is, first of all, be informed. The main thing is to be informed of what's going on. So that's why I thought I should maybe mention.
Information, thank you. And that leads us to our last question for the group. And we want you to toss it out fast. We want you to tell us who's not here. What organizations, individuals, sorry? People who get more than $200,000 are not here. Who else is not here? That's not true, they're saying over here. Yes, ma'am. Young people of color, we need more of those in the conversation. We need more of those in the conversation. Is that fair? East Austin natives.
She. And actually talk to people. And, you know, I'm a director at Motion Media Arts Center, and I worked from the ground up. And I do not meet people from East Austin unless they're in our facility. When I go to other organizations that get $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, I'm seeing people traveling from West Austin, from Terrytown, that are going to the movies. You know, I'm not seeing people that I grew up with get access to things. And I'm not talking articulately right now at all. I'm sorry, but I don't see people from my direct community that I grew up in at these meetings ever. I see like maybe 5, you know, like it's a very small percentage of us that are ingrained in the arts community, are ingrained in the conversations with the city of Austin. And I really feel like that has to change. And again, I'm very proud from being from East Austin, but when I hear about things that are happening in East Austin, it directly affects me. It directly affected my family. I grew up in a poverty level. Then went to Go Valley Elementary School, was bused across town to O'Henry because my mom thought, you know, you'll get better access to education because money wasn't being put into our community. But now money's being put into our community, but we've all left because we've all been priced out. So that's where I'm at, and I'm really angry about it, and I can go on and on about it. I'm open to talking about it. I wasn't planning on talking tonight, so sorry again. I'm kind of a mess of words. But yeah, my name is Faiza.
Thank you, Vela. Here and then here. This lady behind you. And then.
Yeah, I want to thank Faiza for rounding it up because, I mean, there's agency here that are, as we said, are receiving substantial budgets that are providing programming, you know, but the camp price point at, you know, $300, $400 plus. That is not going to attract the students. I'm the founder of Latinitas. There are students attending today for $15. So if you haven't thought of any of these things in the past 25 years of your existence in Austin, if you've been around that long, and now you're getting to it, and now you're looking at your board about representation, well then you are, you will need to adapt or die. I think it's maybe a little more of, how much more instruction can we provide? Instead, let's maybe focus on many of us who are on the ground. I see so many people here who have been doing that for 30 years. If this is just coming into your purview or you're just getting down to it, you are way behind the curve and you are not providing to 80% of our incoming kindergarten in Austin ISD, and maybe everyone knows this, is Latino. This has been going on for the past 5 years. It will continue. The Asian community is the fastest growing population in the city. If those are not cultural groups that are on your immediate radar, and of course other diversity and inclusion, then, should they even be part of this community?
Good question. Okay, the lady with the white cape right here was waiting.
It was a little cold earlier. I would say some of the people that are not here right now speaking as a representative of a larger organization is the 72 members of our staff, the nearly 300 different producers, designers, and other people. When we're hiring 90% Austin local and focusing on making sure that we're giving good creative jobs to people who grew up here in Austin and putting a preference on that and working with people to make sure that we maintain we maintain a space for them. And then also providing equity and outreach programs in schools to teach the skills that you need to work in these theaters. And so, yes, there are larger organizations here, but the funding goes to different things in different organizations. And I just want to say that I'm here as a representative of hundreds of other people who are from Austin, who represent myriad communities, who also work within our organization and are not here tonight because they're producing wonderful plays, or they're backstage, or they're on stage. So I just wanted to give them a shout out.
Thank you.
My name is Bertha Rendon Delgado, and I'm from East Austin, and I can relate to my East Austin sister right here. I don't see East Austin artists in here that are graffiti artists, that are video artists, that are street artists, that are muralists, people that are from my neighborhood, people that are locally, that have lived here all of their lives. They are the starving artists. We as veteran artists and artist organizers and people out there that are trying to access these funds and actually create murals like La Loteria, like For La Raza mural, like all of the murals that we're trying to save in East Austin, it is very challenging and difficult, and it's very difficult to raise our children and our next generation of Austinites to be able to be the emerging artists that they need to be. We don't even have access to the Mac Center, which was made for us to be there, so we can have art shows, so we can have art programs. So East Austin culture and their identity is not erased. We're constantly fighting in our streets here in Austin, especially the gentrified neighborhoods that are currently under target right now. We are fighting just to keep our identity in our neighborhood. So I really, really like that we're here all together, but these conversations and these panel discussions have been discussed in the past. We need to put our boots on, and we need to start making things happen. Not a round table, a square table. We need action, and we need action now.
Excellent. Thank you. And I have a lady over here. Do you have a microphone? Let me take the next two. What's my time, Alberto? Sorry. Okay. I'll take two more. Can I see one here? One more. Okay, and this lady. All right.
Hi there. This is supposed to be about equity, access, and investment. And for the last hour and a half, this has been up on the wall, and it is output. Okay, we can subscribe to the newsletter. We can go up there and learn more about cultural equity. That City of Austin Arts doesn't work. That is not a real Twitter handle. If you take the S off the end, you at least get a real handle, but it's inactive. If you really want to try to contact, then you need the ATEX Economic Development at ECONVITALITY ATEX. And I would love it if you had an email address up there. Some way to accept our input in writing. I arrived with lots of notes to share. And after two hours, I haven't really had a chance to share real input and ideas for improving things. Oops.
So noted. Thank you. We'll make sure that we ask the staff to speak to that.
Thank you. Yeah, you don't have any way for us to input things into the process except through the round table. And this is lovely, but it's not why I came here tonight.
Okay. Thank you very much. So I have one back here. This lady back here.
Thank you. I just wanted to respond to talking about assimilation. We were talking about it earlier, and the people that aren't in this room. I would consider myself an artist, and I've done art in many different arenas. I want to make a shout out to Algo. Algo gave me one of the first opportunities to express some of my poetry almost 20 years ago. Thank you very much. I've done art with Outsider Festival. I've done art with Generic Ensemble Company. the Vortex. I've done work with Glamour Girls in East Austin. It's run by an African-American woman teaching young girls body positivity. I've done photography with kids that I've met in East Austin and just brought my music equipment to where they were and just set my laptop up and my keyboards and just let them have at it. Took pictures for their projects. And I just want to say there's been a few organizations that are not people of color led, you might want to say. We're out here, people of color are out here making art all the time, but please don't tokenize us. And what I mean by tokenize, what you said earlier about you could have an all-white male board and you have to actively, you can't just open the door. Even if you're actively reaching out and calling me to come be on your board, I'm not there to do that labor for you. There's people of color all over Austin. There's young people of color all over Austin. There's people in this room. You don't put that labor on just one person to suddenly make yourself look like you're diverse in this community so that then you can move forward your agenda. Sure. It's very painful. It can be a very isolating experience if you're outside of your community where you actually are embraced. When organizations like Algo make it very clear that you're welcome. Generic Ensemble made it very clear. The Vortex makes it very clear. And there's a community around you constantly saying that we accept you. You're LGBTQ, you're trans, you're a person of color, you're maybe disabled. Whatever it is that you're struggling with, we want you here and we actively work to make that happen. We're just not tokenizing you to move our agenda forward. So, and I know a lot of folks get that really confused and they genuinely think they're doing a service when they open a seat to a person of color, but you're not. So whatever you need to do, I don't have the answers, but please don't put that burden on people of color. Okay?
Thank you. It's a good leadership thought. And the last one over here.
And I hope that my organization is not doing that because we are truly based on diversity of all art, color, race, everything. And the diversity of Austin, to me, is what we are. And what surprised me when I walked into this room and we all settled down and we started this, if there was just one body in the seat representing the 500 and some odd people that were funded last year, one body, this would be completely full. So why isn't there somebody representing everybody that was funded last year so we could all share and support each other? Because we have enough resources between us to help each other, guys. Call me. Call Ann. Call each other. Let's help each other. We can do this. But it is that square table all together, talking to each other. Talk to each other. But I was very surprised almost immediately. The people that got the funding, where are they? Where's the conversation?
Thank you. So we're going to wrap up and ask the staff to come back and make sure that we clarify additional ways to inform this process. Listen, this is the beginning of a year-long conversation. I've heard so many gems that I need to dissect, follow up on. I'm sorry, you have one other. Are you turned on? Well, I
just wanted to add one thing. I'm not throwing shade at any organization that gets $200,000. That wasn't what I meant by my commentary. Organizations get that money. Like, get your money, get your funding, do your programming. But what I'm saying is that I feel like there are organizations that are hitting those bullet points that are underfunded. And it's really frustrating to me being from East Austin and seeing organizations that have been in East Austin that serve the East Austin community that are barely scraping by because they're not properly funded. And then these organizations that, might serve some people of color or people within inclusion and diversity and culture and all those words we're talking about, but that are making tons of money. And on top of that, they might have a free space. And the number one here is affordability to me in Austin. That's why everybody's struggling, is because people are being displaced. They're being displaced from their spaces. They're being displaced from their homes. So when there are City of Austin buildings that are lying empty, Why aren't these organizations that have been proven to be serving the community, generating funds, you know, having whatever services they have and people are using them, why aren't they offered a space at one of these? And I just want to kind of, I just don't know the answer to that, and I feel like there hasn't been transparency with that on why are the spaces empty that could be occupied by organizations that need space. Instead of us spending $25,000 a month on rent, we could be spending that $25,000 a month on the community. And so that's my number one issue. And again, I wasn't throwing shade. I don't want anybody to think that. I was just really upset. I'm very passionate about this because I'm from East Austin and because it's a very touchy subject for me. So take what I'm saying as a personal anecdote, not an anecdote that is representing the organization that I work for. If you have beef, have it with me. Don't have it with the organization.
Thank you very much. We heard that also at the top. What I will say as your consulting team is that what we heard tonight gives us a lot of ammunition to probe, and it gives us a lot more questions to ask as we move forward. So don't be shy. The reason you have a town hall meeting is to have an open discussion, and I thank you for having that with us tonight. I'm going to give it back to Alberto and Meghan.
Check, check, check. Okay, yes. To Tony's observation, thank you. I just want to point out, I'm sorry for not making it more clear, that those are social media channels for Instagram and Facebook. And I'll find out what's going on with that Twitter. And also, what I want to say is, thank you so much, folks, for sticking this out with us, but more importantly, sticking it out with each other. We know this isn't a usual context of maybe the town hall you experience, but it's purposefully so. We want to cross-pollinate, not just testify. And I think, just speaking for myself, I really enjoyed watching people speak to one another and not just speak to the bureaucrats. So thank you for sticking it out. I'm going to just turn it over to Meghan, and please do stay tuned. Last little thing, we wanted to purposefully hold back on a questionnaire. It will be at this site for people to provide ongoing feedback who can't show up to anything that we're doing over the next year if that's a thing. So thank you again, everybody. Let me pass it to Meghan.
Just want to again add my thanks, and to the point that was made earlier, a lot of people are not in this room because they are working artists, and we understand that and we value that, and we are coming to you. This is just one opportunity to have dialogue, but there will be many, many others. If we are not reaching you or someone you know, we will come to you. You just have to let us know what is convenient for you, where, when, what to bring, what to feed. Please just tell us. We are at your service. We know this conversation cannot be a complete conversation without everyone at that table sharing how they feel and how they access the arts and how we as a city can support everyone. So I just want to end with that to say thank you again. Please reach out to us. Meghan.Wells, that's MEGHAN .WELLS at Austin, Texas, all spelled out, .gov. If you go to the tiny URL, I'm also listed on that page. Happy to be of service. Anything else?
Alberto.Mejia at AustinTexas.gov. Last name M-E-J-I-A. First name Alberto.
Again, thank you all for coming.